Welcome. Once again today, we are opening the dusty pages of time and setting out on a quiet journey through history in the silence of the night. This time, our subject is the concept of beauty in the Middle Ages. What did people do to become beautiful back then? How far were they willing to go in the name of beauty? You will be surprised. But before we begin, if this channel brings you peace, helps you fall asleep, or simply satisfies your curiosity, please take a moment to look at the thanks button below the video. This small gesture of support is a great source of motivation for us. If you're ready, take a deep breath, close your eyes, and let us begin walking together through the mirror of the past. As the morning sun reflected on the pale surface of the stone-paved courtyard, Genevieve stood tall before her mother. She was only 13 years old, but if she was ever to become the wife of a count, she had to take part in her first whitening ceremony today. The servants applied an even paler powder to her already fair skin. Instead of rosy color, a blue tint was pressed onto her cheeks to imitate visible veins. Finally, she was told to open her mouth. Hesitantly, Genevieve parted her lips. A woman stepped closer and, with a small stick, spread a dark mixture across her teeth. She did not need a mirror. She already knew. Her teeth had to be completely black, because her mother had told her, "A girl with white skin and black teeth smells of wealth." Yet when Genevieve looked at her reflection, she saw not beauty, but fear. In medieval and Renaissance Europe, beauty standards were vastly different from the ideals we know today. While healthy skin, bright white teeth, and a natural appearance are now considered symbols of beauty, back then, these ideas were almost entirely reversed. Beauty was not merely a physical image. It was also a marker of social class, a cultural symbol, and even a way of life intertwined with faith. Pale skin was an essential requirement of beauty. However, this was not the healthy fairness that came naturally. It represented nobility, a life spent indoors, and a lifestyle protected from sunlight. While peasants working in the fields became tanned, nobles remained inside their homes, using lead-based powders to make their skin even whiter. Over time, these powders caused rashes, wounds, and even death, but the ruthless rules of fashion never changed. Another striking beauty standard alongside pale skin was black teeth. During the 14th and 15th centuries, sugar was still expensive and difficult to obtain. Those who could afford large amounts of sweets often developed tooth decay, causing their teeth to darken. This decayed appearance became a symbol of wealth. Someone with black teeth was assumed to be rich enough to consume plenty of sugar. Meanwhile, poor people often had healthy white teeth. But this was viewed as a sign of lower social status. Some nobles even darkened their teeth intentionally using soot, tar, or wine residue. In certain places, the practice became symbolic, similar to Japan's ohaguro tradition. Women sometimes blackened their teeth before marriage as a recognized sign of beauty. Yet this ideal extended far beyond physical appearance. Women with pale skin and black teeth were believed to be delicate, refined, and elite. These traits created an artificial boundary separating them from labor, sunlight, fields, and therefore from the lower classes. Beauty was not natural. It was a privilege that had to be purchased, protected, and maintained. Interestingly, these standards were more flexible for men. Expectations regarding male skin color were less strict. However, men also applied powders to their bodies, wore gloves, and used excessive amounts of perfume to conceal sweat and signs of natural life. Bad odors were considered the scent of the lower classes. None of these appearances were merely about physical beauty. They were expressions of respect for God, loyalty to the social order, and obedience to society's hierarchy. In other words, when a young girl became beautiful, she was not only representing herself, but also the class to which she belonged. Unfortunately, these expectations placed enormous pressure on women. The body became a battlefield. Lead-based powders poisoned the bloodstream. Chemicals reduced fertility and caused skin infections. Yet all of this suffering was accepted as the price of noble beauty. Over time, sugar became cheaper and more accessible. Darkened teeth were no longer exclusive to the wealthy. As a result, the fashion for black teeth faded away. By the 17th century, beauty standards began to change. Whitening one's teeth became a mark of distinction. Pale skin remained desirable, but now teeth also had to be bright and sparkling. This transformation occurred not because society's class structure changed, but because economic access changed. Looking back today, these beauty ideals may seem strange or even amusing. But in those days, when a young girl looked into a mirror, she lived not according to what she saw in herself, but according to what others would see. Pale skin, black teeth. These were not merely physical features. They were symbols of status, belonging, faith, and obedience. The air carried the coolness of April, yet the young girl standing inside the house was sweating as she stared into the mirror. The newly attached forehead band on her brow immediately caught attention in her reflection. Her mother nodded with satisfaction. "Now you look like a proper lady," she said. The girl noticed how much larger her forehead appeared, yet she could not decide whether it looked beautiful or ugly. Outside, birds were singing. Inside, a young girl was learning the definition of beauty all over again. During the Renaissance and the centuries that followed, especially in Western Europe, beauty for women was not considered an innate gift, but rather a duty that required constant effort. One of the most iconic and astonishing beauty practices of the era was forehead enlargement. The forehead became one of the most important symbols of elegance. Women with high, broad, smooth foreheads were associated with nobility and refinement. To achieve this appearance, hair was shaved away. In some cases, it was plucked out by the roots, or the front hairline was deliberately forced to recede. Women used sharp razors or special lotions mixed with vinegar to remove hair from the front of their heads. These methods were painful and often caused irritation. Yet beauty had a price, and that price was paid in silence. Every time women looked in the mirror, they saw not their own faces, but society's expectations reflected back at them. A high forehead was associated with intelligence and sophistication. Even artists reinforced this ideal in their paintings. Consider Botticelli's The Birth of Venus, or Leonardo da Vinci's portraits of noblewomen. The women depicted often possess unusually broad foreheads. This was no coincidence. It was fashion. And this fashion left psychological scars, as well as physical ones. Enlarging the forehead was not merely an aesthetic practice. It was also a sign of obedience and conformity to the social order. Women did not perform it solely to become beautiful. They did it to demonstrate the class to which they belonged. It was a silent way of saying, "This is who I am. I will be whatever society expects me to be." After all, in those days, a woman's voice was not expected to be loud, but her forehead was expected to be high. Hair, in many cultures, has long been associated with femininity. Yet in this world, even a few centimeters of hair at the front of a woman's head were considered undesirable. Particularly among noble families and within royal courts, girls began enlarging their foreheads as soon as they reached adolescence. It became a kind of rite of passage, a silent celebration marking the transition from childhood into womanhood. But this practice affected far more than physical appearance. While women opened their foreheads, they often surrendered a part of themselves as well. Sometimes it was their freedom. Sometimes it was their individuality. Perhaps the saddest part was that these sacrifices often went unnoticed. Neither history books nor the records written by men made room for these struggles. Yet the traces remained on women's faces, in their eyes, and within their silence. Eventually, the fashion changed. A new queen arrived. An artist pursued a different aesthetic vision. Foreheads became covered by hair once more. Yet although fashions changed, the social pressures imposed upon women remained, because the issue was never really about hair. It was about belonging, conforming, submitting. Looking back today, what appears strange to us conceals a much deeper story. Women giving up parts of their bodies for beauty, living according to invisible social rules, accepting it all without question. That was the truth, hidden behind those widened foreheads. Perhaps the little girl staring into the mirror that day was not only opening her forehead, perhaps she was opening the path of her future. Without realizing it, with every inch of hair she lost, a small part of herself disappeared as well. If this story moves you, remember to subscribe to our channel and support us through the thanks button below, so we can continue exploring the hidden yet deeply felt pains of history together. Because sometimes, history is hidden within a single strand of hair. Now, let us continue. The small mirror trembled in her hands. The morning sunlight coming through the window fell directly upon her face. The young woman looked one last time at the tweezers she held. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. A refined woman does not have eyebrows. She took a deep breath. Then, one by one, with almost religious devotion, she began plucking. She was not merely hurting her eyebrows. She was hurting herself. But she could never say that aloud, because this was the silent burden of beauty. From the late Middle Ages through the Renaissance and even into the Victorian era, women's bodies in Europe were shaped according to social expectations. These standards define not only fashion, but also a woman's place in society, her status, and even her silence. One of the most striking practices was the complete removal of eyebrows. Today, beauty routines focus on shaping, defining, and enhancing eyebrows. But centuries ago, ideal beauty demanded the exact opposite. For a face to appear delicate, obedient, and unobtrusive, a smooth, eyebrowless forehead was considered almost essential. Eyebrows were seen as symbols of expression, resistance, and character. Therefore, removing them made a woman appear gentler, more feminine, and more submissive. Among noble women, this was not only a sign of beauty, it was also a sign of status, breeding, and proper upbringing. An eyebrowless face suggested that a woman had enough wealth and leisure to devote herself to constant grooming, because maintaining this look required continuous effort. The brows had to be plucked repeatedly. Sometimes vinegar-based or herbal treatments were used in an attempt to prevent the hairs from growing back. Yet the effects were not only physical, they were psychological as well. In a sense, removing the eyebrows stripped the face of reaction, emotion, and individuality. And that was precisely the point. A woman who displayed no strong emotions. A woman who existed to be looked at, like a painting. Beautiful, but silent. Beautiful, but never resisting. Artists eagerly reflected this ideal, Renaissance portraits frequently depict women with nearly invisible eyebrows, because this was not merely fashion, it was the outward expression of a worldview. As a woman's expression disappeared, her voice seemed to fade as well, and when women were silent, society considered itself more comfortable. But what did women themselves feel? Some accepted the tradition. Mothers taught it to their daughters, explaining that the first step toward becoming a refined woman began with the eyebrows. Yet deep down, many felt the pain. Every plucked hair felt like losing a small piece of themselves. Every glance in the mirror reminded them of the role society had chosen for them. Nor was this practice limited to the nobility. Over time, middle-class women began copying the trend as well, because beauty was not considered something one was born with. It required effort, and the cost of becoming what society wanted often began with a pair of tweezers and continued through years of silence. She stood in front of a closed window, a young woman holding a silk corset in her hands. Her mother was preparing to lace her into it. "I can't breathe," the girl whispered. Her mother smiled. "A graceful woman does not breathe," she replied. "She takes others' breath away." She pulled the laces tighter. The young girl's ribs pressed inward a little more. But her mother was pleased. Her waist now fit within the span of a single hand. It is difficult to explain what Victorian women sacrificed in the pursuit of elegance, because those sacrifices were not merely physical. They formed a social and psychological chain, and the strongest link in that chain was undoubtedly the corset. Today, when we think of undergarments, we imagine comfort, flexibility, and soft fabrics. But for women of that era, the first thing worn each morning was often a rigid garment made of thick cloth, reinforced with steel or whalebone stays, designed to compress the body into an idealized shape. It sculpted the body like a statue. But unlike a statue, the woman inside was alive. And with every breath, she was being crushed a little more. The corset's purpose was not simply to create a narrow waist. It lifted the bust, pulled the shoulders back, forced the body into a posture considered proper and respectable. Above all, it compelled women to conform to an ideal feminine form, an ideal that was often unrealistic. The narrowed waist displaced internal organs, compressed the lungs, and in extreme cases even caused broken ribs. Doctors of the time were often powerless against these consequences. Many girls were placed into tight corsets before their bodies had fully developed. Their growth was restricted. Their rib cages sometimes became permanently deformed. Yet society's response to all this suffering was remarkably simple. How elegant you look. In truth, this elegance was a form of invisible captivity. Women became strangers to their own bodies. They suffered while sitting. They feared taking deep breaths. Circulation slowed. Pressure built against the stomach. Fainting became common. This is one reason fainting women appear so frequently in Victorian literature and art. Sometimes it was attributed to emotion, sometimes to delicate nerves, but often the cause was much simpler: the corset. Yet corsets were more than clothing. They were considered evidence of proper upbringing. When a young girl was introduced to her first corset, she was no longer regarded as a child, because womanhood meant learning to endure pain, learning to endure discomfort quietly, learning to smile while suffering. The pressure was not only physical, it was social as well. A woman who refused to wear a corset risked being labeled careless, improper, or even morally suspect. Society judged women not only by their shape, but also by how willingly they submitted to the shaping process. In that sense, the corset became more than a garment. It became a symbol of discipline and obedience. But eventually, even this system reached its limits. As the 20th century approached and women's rights movements gained strength, women began questioning the traditions that had confined them. To claim ownership of their bodies, they first had to break free from the metal cages wrapped around them. Voices began to rise. "We want to breathe." Women realized they did not have to risk their health or their lives to appear elegant. Slowly, the corset ceased to dominate women's wardrobes. More flexible, healthier alternatives emerged. Yet history still whispers about those narrow, steel-reinforced instruments hidden beneath layers of silk. Every whisper sounds like the crack of a rib. Every memory feels like a woman finally taking a breath. Because today, women deserve not only the right to breathe, but also the right to live comfortably within their own bodies. Every corset should be remembered as a symbol of a moment when women were forced to battle against their own identities. Elegance should never require suffering. A woman descending the steps of a cathedral suddenly stopped. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, but everyone else's attention was fixed on her hat. Rising high from either side of her head, it seemed almost tall enough to brush against the windows nearby. It swayed in the wind like the wings of a great bird. Curious eyes followed her wherever she went, yet no one asked whether she could breathe comfortably beneath it. No one wondered how her neck endured its weight, because the hat was not merely decoration, it was status. These remarkable headdresses, which became iconic during the late Middle Ages and especially the Gothic period, were known as hennons. Among ordinary people, however, they acquired many other names. Devil's horns, women's towers, crowns reaching toward heaven. To some, they represented elegance. To others, they symbolized the absurd excesses of the aristocracy. The truth was that hennons were far more than a passing fashion. They were social declarations. Most hennons were cone-shaped, though some featured two upward-pointing extensions resembling horns. Their heights ranged from about 20 centimeters to nearly a full meter. Veils made of lace or fine fabric often extended from the tip, sometimes trailing almost to the ground. Women appeared as though they were carrying towers upon their heads. These extravagant headdresses were primarily worn by women eager to display their place within the upper classes. The size of the hat, the quality of the fabric, and the jewels decorating it all communicated social status. The larger the hennon, the wealthier the woman. The more elaborate the decoration, the nobler her family. It was a graceful way of saying, "I belong here. You do not." Yet fashion came with challenges. Hennons were often so tall and cumbersome that women had to duck when passing through doorways. On windy days, servants were sometimes required to help steady them. At various points, church authorities attempted to ban these headdresses, claiming they distracted worshippers during religious services. But rules often applied differently to nobles. For many aristocrats, fashion carried more weight than religious disapproval. The physical burdens were significant as well. Special collars were used to support the neck. Hairstyles required hours of preparation. Hidden pins and intricate structures were used to ensure the veils draped correctly. All of this effort was often undertaken for one simple reward: to attract a few extra moments of attention at a grand ball. Even beyond the aristocracy, hennons provoked strong reactions. Some members of the lower classes viewed them as symbols of arrogance. Certain preachers condemned them as manifestations of vanity and pride. They argued that such towering displays challenged humility itself. Yet, like every fashion trend, the hennon eventually disappeared. On one of England's foggy mornings, a woman stood before a mirror. Dark circles lingered beneath her eyes. Fine wrinkles crossed her forehead. Faint sunspots marked her cheeks. She was dissatisfied with what she saw. She had been taught that beauty meant possessing a perfectly white complexion. She opened a pale lavender-colored bottle. Inside was a milky liquid with a faint metallic scent. She dipped her finger into it and gently spread it across her cheeks. At that moment, all she felt was coolness. Yet what would eventually burn both her skin and her spirit began right then. During the Victorian era, beauty standards were very different from those of today. A beautiful woman was expected to be pale rather than sun-kissed. Pallor symbolized delicacy, purity, and noble birth. Tanned skin suggested labor, poverty, and long hours spent under the sun. For aristocratic women, or those who wished to appear aristocratic, a white complexion was essential. To achieve it, many turned to methods that were anything but natural. One of the most popular was a cosmetic mixture known as ceruse. Ceruse was made by combining substances such as vinegar and lead carbonate. In other words, women were applying lead directly to their faces. At first, the results appeared impressive. The skin looked smooth, radiant, and almost porcelain-like. But beneath the surface, the damage had already begun. The mixture slowly burned the skin. It clogged pores. It destroyed skin cells. Over time, it could even cause jaw deterioration and tooth loss. Surprisingly, lead-based cosmetics were not limited to ordinary women. They were widely used among royalty as well. One of the most famous examples was Elizabeth I. Historical accounts suggest that she frequently relied on ceruse to maintain her iconic pale complexion. Over the years, her skin reportedly became almost wax-like in appearance. The cracks and imperfections caused by years of cosmetic use were even reflected in some portraits of the period. Yet society continued to view her as a symbol of elegance. The danger extended far beyond the skin. Lead penetrated beneath the surface. It entered the bloodstream. It damaged the nervous system. Women who used these products often suffered from headaches, blurred vision, breathing difficulties, and even miscarriages. Yet the true problem was not merely the poison itself. It was the poisonous nature of the beauty standard society had created. The expectation of flawless whiteness was so powerful that many women mistook a path toward illness for a path toward beauty. Eventually, science confirmed the dangers of ceruse, but knowledge alone did not immediately end its use. Beauty was not determined by facts. It was determined by how people looked at one another. To earn those approving glances, women willingly risked their health. They stood before mirrors decorated with lead and accepted the possibility of decay. The obsession with pale skin extended beyond makeup. Various drinks and herbal mixtures were also marketed as complexion-enhancing remedies. Many contained dangerous ingredients such as opium, arsenic, and mercury. Women were not merely poisoning their faces. They were poisoning their entire bodies. Today, beauty aisles are filled with cosmetics and skincare products. Back then, women often faced what were essentially chemical disasters, disguised as beauty treatments. For many women of the era, beauty was not simply about appearance. It was tied to survival, to marriage, to social acceptance, to opportunity. Looking beautiful could mean securing a future, and for that reason, many were willing to sacrifice almost everything. When we compare that world to our own, the similarities can be unsettling. Today, we no longer apply lead to our faces, but we have filters, perfection obsessions, endless beauty trends promising flawless skin. The lead may no longer come from cosmetic jars, yet in some ways, it still reaches our minds. Throughout history, people have chased beauty. Sometimes the price was so high that it masked even the sin of death itself. The lead-whitened faces of the Victorian era still have something to teach us. Elegance can sometimes be poisonous, and every generation that accepts beauty standards without question eventually creates its own version of lead. In a grand manor lined with mirrors, a woman sat brushing her hair with a silver-handled comb. Beneath layers of powder and perfume lay her pale skin. A servant approached carrying a basin of water and a piece of soap. The woman raised an eyebrow. "Don't touch that," she said. "I am receiving guests today." Quietly, the servant carried the water away, because she understood. In that household, roses and perfume mattered more than soap and water. And cleanliness did not always mean elegance. Strange as it may seem today, cleanliness and beauty have not always gone hand in hand. Throughout much of European history, from the late Middle Ages through the Renaissance and into the Victorian period, being clean was sometimes viewed as a habit of the lower classes. While perfumes filled palaces, noble residences, and grand ballrooms, it was not uncommon for hands and faces to remain unwashed for weeks. Many members of the upper classes regarded water with suspicion. According to prevailing medical beliefs of the time, water opened the pores and allowed disease to enter the body. Bathing was therefore considered risky. In addition, heating and transporting water required time, labor, and servants. It was a luxury. Rather than relying on bathing, the aristocracy developed alternatives. The most important of these alternatives was perfume, lavender, rose oil, musk. These powerful fragrances were applied liberally to areas of the body that rarely encountered soap or water. Clothing was scented. Rooms were filled with fragrant burners. Scent became a substitute for cleanliness. To smell pleasant was to appear refined. Few people discussed what might be hidden beneath those fragrances. Cosmetics served a similar purpose. Powders, creams, and coloring agents concealed dirt and skin problems. Some women went weeks without washing their faces, simply adding fresh layers of cosmetic products over old ones. Hair was brushed, but often not washed. Special scented combs and brushes distributed oils throughout the hair, rather than removing them. Ironically, servants and laborers often washed themselves more frequently because their work required it. They sweated. They spent time outdoors. They handled dirt and physical labor. The people considered dirty were often cleaner than those regarded as elegant. That is how far beauty and cleanliness had drifted apart. In fact, some noblewomen considered excessive washing harmful to beauty. They believed water would damage the skin's delicate balance, fade the complexion, and even accelerate aging. A pale face covered with powder was seen as more attractive than naturally clean skin. This belief was reinforced by fashion, medicine, and social expectations. Beauty became a performance, and perfume became the curtain-hiding reality behind the stage. Even kings and queens participated in this culture. Historical accounts often mention rulers who bathed only a handful of times throughout their lives. While some of these stories may be exaggerated, they reveal an important truth. Cleanliness was not always associated with prestige. Appearance mattered more than hygiene. What people saw mattered more than what was actually there. Looking back today, it is easy to laugh at the contradiction. Yet perhaps every era has its own version of perfume. Every generation develops ways of hiding discomfort, flaws, and reality beneath carefully crafted appearances. In those centuries, perfume concealed the body. Today, filters often conceal the truth. The tools may have changed. Human nature has not. Beauty has always been intertwined with illusion. And sometimes, the strongest fragrance is the one used to hide what people refuse to see. The candlelight flickered against the walls as a young woman sat before a dressing table. A maid carefully separated sections of her hair. Nearby stood small jars filled with powders, oils, and strange mixtures. The room smelled faintly of herbs. The woman watched silently as the maid began applying a dark substance to her scalp. "Will it work?" she asked quietly. The maid hesitated. "That is what they say." The woman nodded. Hope was often stronger than certainty. Throughout history, hair has carried extraordinary symbolic importance. It represented youth, health, fertility, status. For women especially, thick and beautiful hair was often regarded as one of the most valuable signs of attractiveness. Yet hair loss, thinning hair, and aging have existed for as long as humanity itself, and wherever insecurity exists, remedies soon follow. During the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, and the Victorian period, countless treatments promised fuller, healthier hair. Many of them were ineffective, some were bizarre, others were genuinely dangerous. Among the most common remedies were mixtures made from animal fat, bear grease, goose fat, pig lard. These substances were massaged into the scalp in the belief that they would stimulate growth. Strong-smelling herbs such as rosemary, nettle, sage, and garlic were also widely used. While a few herbal ingredients may have offered minor benefits, most treatments lacked any scientific foundation. Some recipes were even more unsettling. Historical beauty manuals describe preparations involving crushed insects, ashes, animal blood, and various unknown ingredients. The logic behind them often relied on superstition rather than evidence. If a particular animal possessed thick fur, people assumed some part of that animal might transfer its qualities to human hair. Such ideas sound strange today, yet they were accepted as serious advice for centuries. Hair loss was not merely a cosmetic concern. It carried social consequences. A woman whose hair appeared thin or unhealthy risked being viewed as older, less attractive, or less desirable. Marriage prospects could be affected. Reputation could suffer. Beauty standards transformed a natural biological process into a source of anxiety. Men also faced similar concerns. Baldness frequently became the subject of jokes and ridicule. Wealthy men often purchased wigs to conceal thinning hair. Some wigs became so elaborate that they developed entire industries around their production. By the 18th century, wigs had become powerful symbols of status. Yet beneath many of those magnificent hairstyles were individuals struggling with insecurity. In some cases, the treatments themselves caused further damage. Harsh chemicals irritated the scalp. Heavy powders weakened hair roots. Certain mixtures caused infections. People searching for beauty often ended up worsening the very problem they hoped to solve. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of these remedies is how familiar they still feel. Modern advertisements continue to promise miraculous transformations. New products appear every year. People still spend enormous amounts of money searching for solutions to aging, hair loss, and appearance-related fears. The ingredients have changed. The emotions have not. The woman sitting before her mirror centuries ago was not very different from someone scrolling through beauty advertisements today. Both were searching for reassurance. Both wanted to feel attractive. Both hoped that a small bottle might restore confidence. History reminds us that beauty industries rarely sell products alone. They sell hope. Sometimes that hope is helpful. Sometimes it becomes exploitation. And sometimes the strongest ingredient inside any beauty remedy is not science at all. It is the belief that we are not enough without it. That belief has survived far longer than any cream, powder, or potion ever created. The fire in the hearth had nearly burned out. Outside, the wind moved softly through the darkness. Inside, a woman sat alone before a mirror. She touched her face gently. The powder, the perfumes, the plucked brows, the painful fashions, the endless rules. She had followed them all. Yet for a brief moment, she wondered a question that countless women before and after her would also ask. Was any of it ever truly enough? Throughout history, beauty has never been a simple matter of appearance. It has always reflected something larger. Power, status, fear, belonging, survival. Every era creates its own standards. Every generation invents new rules, and every society finds ways to convince people that happiness lies just beyond the next transformation. In the Middle Ages, women blackened their teeth. During the Renaissance, they enlarged their foreheads and removed their eyebrows. In the Victorian era, they tightened corsets until breathing became difficult and applied dangerous substances to their skin. These practices may seem strange today. Some may even appear shocking. Yet they reveal something profoundly human. The desire to be accepted. the desire to be admired, the desire to belong. None of these emotions are unique to the past. They remain with us today. Modern beauty standards may look different, but they are often driven by the same forces. Social approval, comparison, insecurity, aspiration. Technology has changed. Fashion has changed. The mirrors have changed. Human nature has changed far less. Looking back at history is not only about examining unusual customs, it is also about recognizing ourselves within them. The women who endured painful beauty rituals were not foolish. They were responding to the expectations of their world, just as people today respond to the expectations of theirs. History teaches us an important lesson. Beauty standards are temporary. What one generation celebrates, another generation may question. What one century calls elegant, another may call extreme. The rules constantly change, yet people continue to chase them. Perhaps true freedom begins when we understand this, when we recognize that beauty has always been shaped by culture, fashion, and social pressure. When we stop confusing approval with self-worth. When we realize that human value has never depended on meeting an impossible ideal. The woman sitting before the mirror slowly lowered her hand. The room had grown quiet. The candle beside her flickered one final time. Then darkness gently filled the space. And perhaps, for the first time in a very long while, she no longer saw the expectations of society reflected in the glass. She simply saw herself. Thank you for joining this journey through the hidden beauty standards of history. If you enjoyed this exploration, consider subscribing, leaving a like, and supporting the channel through the thanks button below. Your support helps us continue uncovering the forgotten stories, unusual customs, and remarkable lives hidden within the past. Until next time, rest well. And remember, history is never as distant as it seems. Sometimes it is waiting quietly inside the mirror.